Smithsonian World is made possible by Southwestern Bell, the company that's bringing your world closer together through communications. For home, for work, for today and tomorrow, Southwestern Bell Corporation. Smithsonian World is also made possible by the financial support of viewers like you, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
What can we know of Nigerian art? Where does its vitality come from? Is tradition the answer, or modernism? Who are its artists? And what are they telling us?
The chainsaw to me is a symbol of the experience of colonialism, the way it was done brutally, randomly, and horribly. And the fire also has historic significance. It burns, it clears away rough edges, but mainly it unifies everything under black.
On the coast of West Africa lies the nation Nigeria. The river Niger cuts through land which ranges from semi-desert to tropical rainforest. The varied customs, languages, and traditions of Nigeria's 250 ethnic groups fashion its unique richness. Nigeria's population includes a diversity of artists, creative thinkers who question the role of art in their culture. African art raises difficult questions, questions addressed by poet and statesman Leopold Senghor, who said, "African art is concerned with reaching beyond and beneath nature to contact and itself become a part of the vital force. The artistic image is not intended to represent the thing itself, but rather the reality of the force the thing contains. Thus, the moon is fecundity, the elephant is force." When we speak of Nigeria and all of Africa, the key words are tradition and belief, colonialism and independence, repression and freedom. And these words are reflected in its art. Nigeria is the size of California, Nevada, and Arizona combined, but with the largest population of any African nation, 110 million. Though its land is mostly rural, its people crowd into its modern cities. Modern life is especially complex here. It's in just this sort of context, rapid change, disappearing age-old values, that the art develops. In understanding this culture story, artists give us other ways of seeing, alternate routes for making our way. Its art is as vital and diverse as Nigeria itself. Many cultural traditions have long been accommodated by this multi-ethnic society. Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa are but a few of the many peoples fused into a single nation. Western and African, modern and traditional, meet here. For all its vitality, its art has a long tradition. This hour is about the art modern Nigeria is producing. In it, past and present coexist.
Look at the works of various Nigerian artists. You will see that they draw their inspirations from the foundations of our indigenous art, that's the traditional art of Nigeria. If you look at Nok, which goes back to 500 BC, and you trace it through Iboku, which again goes to the 9th century, the beginning, as it were, of the introduction of bronze work in Nigeria. And then through Ife, that goes to the 12th century, and then to Owo and Benin. You will find that artists in Nigeria, be they painters or sculptors, draw a lot of inspiration from these traditional works in Nigeria.
How does tradition persist? Oral tradition and ritual help make sense of the world, and art embodies the wisdom of the culture. Artists like Lamidi Fakeye transmit this knowledge. They keep the flame. Fakeye, a fifth-generation woodcarver, works in the traditional Yoruba way. For him, abstraction is an ancient form of expression. He explains why his figures are abstract and why their heads are larger than the body.
You should not carve anything to look like human beings. If it happened that the person seeing this figure is going to die. This is the belief, of people, and that's why it is changed into kind of abstract. So, and then the reason why the head is bigger than the rest of the body is that we give due respect to our head. And even those days you want to perform sacrifice to your creator, you have to do it through your head, put a kola nut and then pray.
The village of Oshogbo, in the heart of Yoruba land. Using natural materials, Nike produces fabrics based on centuries of Yoruba religion and artistic tradition.
My mother died when I was 6 years old. My grandmother died a year after, and my great-grandmother raised me. And she's the one who is an artist, and she do weaving, and she also do some tie-dye. So when I was small, I used to work with her, and she would teach me all this technique, how we use the natural dye to make the indigo, how to get the color from the purple onion skin, then the tiny, tiny mushroom, you put some vinegar water on this one. This is not the mushroom you eat normally. And you can keep it for about 3 days. Then you can get about really good orange. Normally, we have about 3 techniques. The first technique is dipping. And you wax all the white part, dip it in yellow, wax it, dip it again in orange. You can go as far as 8 colors. Then the other technique is painting the dye on because you don't have much of the dye. And that dye will come out brighter. The other one is when I'm removing the wax. You have to use boiling water. You have to boil the wax out, wash it in the cold water before you put it to dry.
For Nike, the stories she heard as a child are at the heart of her work. They're her medium for artistic expression and also for independence. When her art was recognized the world over, she founded a cooperative to encourage other women in the arts.
And it's not normally easy for a woman to survive. It's a lot of struggle. But we need more women into the art field. The government doesn't normally think art is for women. Maybe if our government can put money down and they have something like women cooperative, which some of these women who are married with 1 or 2 children, they can come. The more they come, they will have an idea because nobody can teach art. You can only encourage people. That is why we opened the cooperative, the artist cooperative in Osogbo.
When Nike first came to Osogbo, she was already a practicing artist. In addition to her art, she did other chores.
Normally as a woman, when they say somebody suffer, I suffer and I don't even know where my suffering started. Then coming to Osogbo, I have to get into Osogbo, trying to learn more about art. I have to fetch at least 3 drums of water. All my hair in the middle there was no hair. And fetching the water is about maybe 2 kilometers to the house. Then after that, I have to cut the grass. They can send me out to go fetch firewood about 2 times a day, which is almost 5 kilometers, and I have to trek all the
triumphs and burdens of Nike's life animate her batiks. But her history is filtered through the medium of Yoruba oral literature. In one folktale, there was a rich princess about to be married. There was a poor boy who had a magic knife. And there was a terrible snake who ate beautiful princesses. But the brave boy killed the snake, and the king gave him half his kingdom and the princess bride.
The Yoruba concept of creativity, it is seeing art through life and seeing life through art. Art is not just art. Art is the totality of the circle of life. From when a child is born to when the child grows old and the child dies. All the circle of life is full of art.
Emmanuel Jegede is a Nigerian in London. Oral tradition profoundly affects his work. But myths are only important if they're used to illuminate the present. Jegede expands Yoruba tradition, forcing it to adapt to the problems of the present. The Yoruba regard children as a great blessing. But modern Yoruba women are caught in a double bind. Having too many children can be tragic. The complexity of this issue is captured on 2 sculptures. This is The Posts of Motherhood. The cycle of life is open, joyous, accepting. But here, the agony of motherhood suggests the pain of having to watch as your children die of hunger.
Most of my work is all telling stories. Stories about life, about agony, about pain, about joy, about dreams, about all things that make life possible. Politics, economics, uncertainty about life. So all these I combined, and this is where I pick my stories from. My relationship with my fellow human beings.
Tradition helps us understand the present. It is a wisdom that uncovers our basic nature. Master sculptor and painter Ben Nwenwu returns to the rituals of his youth and visualizes their hidden spirituality. In the process, he discovers his own essence.
Well, my art began when my father was carving in the shrine at Onitsha in the village. And he did lots of images, traditional images, which were then regarded as, you call them gods. And the effects it had on me was one of fear, because I used to be afraid of them. But when my father died, before I grew into boyhood, I began to look at things and to try to make my own images. I began to draw on the sand. After each rain, it more or less was a slate, a clean slate. Then I drew with a broomstick. Broomstick was my first pencil, and the sand was my paper. I went to my home to Onitsha, and because we have ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, funeral ceremonies, I just began to use some of the traditional dances.
In Nigeria, masquerades are village ceremonies that make use of dance, costume, and music to invoke spirits, the honorable dead. The masquerade acts out religious beliefs. Over all hovers the supernatural.
The dance movement must have a mask associated with it. But the mask itself was not the whole thing. In fact, the dancer and the movement he made were the whole thing. The mask was only a feature signifying his personality, or the personality of the goddess or god or goddess that he represented. I now consider it a very important period in my work. It's taking me back to my roots with my father.
Tradition is also key to Sakari Douglas Camp's 1988-89 exhibition at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art.
I made some drummers to basically tell people that my show was on. my way of advertising Alali, which means festival time in Calamari. my drummers just summed up my whole exhibition, which was an exhibition about Alaliaro, which is a festival boat, two-story festival boat sort of structure, and an audience of women, which I had cheering the boat on. I decided to look at something from my own direct background, which is Kalabari, and we are in the Delta region of Nigeria, River State. I motorize my work because it's like adding a color or turning on the lights. And I feel that it's essential for some pieces, but some structures I'm quite happy with them being still.
This footage was shot by Sukari Douglas Camp as a sketchpad for her work.
That bit of film was in 1984, where we had a centenary celebration. Buguma was having its celebration because we supposedly moved there 100 years ago. They reenact history. They'll actually paddle from one island to the other to emphasize a part of history where people came from one island and went to another. Boats are brought out just to show wealth and power of the various compounds or clans that occupy the island. Kalabari performance is ceremony. And what's extraordinary is that you have all these ideas sort of in the air and physically happening with the performers, and people get possessed. So they open a door to the spirit world so that people, a spirit will come onto someone's head and they'll perform for you. So, I mean, you're not dealing with ordinary human beings, you're dealing with people that are so open that they actually change. I wanted to bring that aspect to my work because I find that exciting and I can relate to it.
African art and ritual go together. Though Sakari Douglas Camp lives in London, there's the powerful tug of her cultural past. But there's also another, more silken thread, the memory of her father.
I started working in metal because my father passed away in 1984. And we make ceremonial beds for people that pass away. And they're decorated by specialists who put all kinds of fabrics in different patterns. They make wave patterns on the bed. And we have a wake keeping for the deceased. And it's like the last honor that you can give someone that's passed away. And I wanted to honor my father in the same way.
So Kari's gift is her special way of seeing. She was the first Kalabari woman to become a sculptor. Her sculpting expands tradition.
I just wanted to think about him, and I spent about 2 months, 2.5, 3 months making this structure that was a 4-poster bed, but made in steel, and that was the first bit of major welding that I ever did. Although the structure's very grand, just having a little motion with a handkerchief, and so many people use handkerchiefs for wiping away tears or just for sweat. I just felt that thing of having it move near you was essential. Before I went to college, I worked with Lamidi Fakaye, and he said that the reason why there are such deep carved areas in West Africa was because the sunlight is so direct that it washes a lot of one's view away. So that was one of the reasons why things were so geometric in that part of Nigeria. And that started off a lot of things. I mean, in Western education, you aren't told that because they don't have any Yoruba carvers teaching students. One's impression of African art is just fierce things looking at one or whatever, and it's nice to know that it's a lot deeper than that.
Tradition is fundamental to life's quest, the quest for identity. For this Nigerian art collector, his search is closely tied to his name, Christopher John Nonyelim Okeke.
There was nothing wrong with being Christopher John. Until I had this little conversation with my father where he wonders aloud whether I know the significance of my silent middle name and proceeds to recount the significance of the word Nonyalum, which means stay with me. Given that I'd had a brother and a sister die before I was born, it was important for him and the rest of my family that I stayed. It seemed such a pity in his view that it was lost completely when I was being described. I mean, I was Christopher John Okeke, and nothing wrong, very nice Christian type names, but again, something missing, not the complete young African. And I now use this name that remained silent for so long, is now in fact the name on my call card, for instance. There's a C which signifies Christopher, which most people know, and that's got a period next to it, and then there's the full name, Nonyalum, and then my last name. So hopefully, slowly, I'm transforming myself into a proper African who just happens to have an appreciation for things other than African.
Let us go back to attitudes. The colonial period in Africa generally was a period when the European came and assumed that he was in fact greater, better than the African. The missionary in Africa, the colonial master, stated that the art that he saw, he was not pleased with it because that art was substantially linked with religion, and traditional art to him then was not the kind of art that he would like. Therefore, lots and lots of these things were burned.
Art is the essence of life of the African. The attempt to destroy the works of art of Africa failed because art forms part of the living process of the people. And so they went on creating art. And so you find that, for instance, the masquerade cult, it exists. It continues to exist. So even if the masks were removed by the colonial masters, new masks were created and sanctified. And so as long as the call to the masquerade existed, the arts were created. As long as the shrines were there, the works of art were created and they were used. As long as there was birth and naming ceremony, as long as there was death, as long as there was marriage, the arts were created. And so it has survived the onslaught and has continued to live. One of the greatest events that happened in Nigeria was the punitive expedition of 1897, in which the kingdom of Benin was destroyed.
The Oba of Benin was a powerful king. It was said that he could raise a force of 100,000 warriors overnight. British traders depended on the Oba to ensure the flow of rubber, wood, and palm oil from the interior bound for the factories of England.
After some time, as the Oba of Benin decided to curtail the excesses of the British traders. And so he made new negotiations to control their movement in and out of his kingdom. And the British administration did not take kindly to this. And so they sent an emissary to meet him in Benin to discuss with him. And unfortunately, at that time, the Oba of Benin was performing an important ceremony that made it mandatory for him not to receive visitors to his kingdom at that material time. So politely he sent words back to the British ambassador, as it were. And of course, the British ambassador felt insulted that a black king could dare Her Majesty's ambassador and said, in spite of your order that we don't come, we shall come to see you. And so the British delegation moved, and the Benin soldiers gallantly put up a resistance and said, no, you can't come into the kingdom at this time. The king cannot receive you now. And in the scuffle that emerged, one or two soldiers, or one or two members of the delegation were killed. And words went back to Britain that there was what they call a massacre of Her Majesty's subjects in Benin.
Reaction was swift. Within weeks of the deaths of several of its men, the British occupied Benin, and fire destroyed the palace and half the city. The Oba, religious and judicial leader of this ancient kingdom, was banished to die in exile. The inevitable result was an end to classical Benin art.
The soldiers came into the palace and they were stunned at the works of art they found in the palace. They looted everything that could be looted. They removed everything that could be removed.
This art is the sacred story in bronze of a nation, the official repository of Benin history.
And suddenly, in 1897, Benin works of art burst into Europe. And that was, as it were, the end of an epoch and the beginning of a new era when the Benin works of art went into decline because of the punitive expedition of 1897.
The son of the Oba was restored to the throne in 1914. Today, the National Museum in Lagos holds a significant collection of bronzes that attest to an elegant and sophisticated past, a past that accommodated both African and European images. This 16th century Oba is shown with mudfish feet. Some historians believe because he was crippled. Others say that this image reflects the Oba's power, as unfathomable as the sea. The bronze record is peopled with Portuguese traders, warriors, and members of the court. Despite attempts to extinguish this art, Benin's bronze casters are still active, still working in the lost wax process. The work involves an original fashioned of beeswax, which is built up over a clay core. These artisans work in the same way their ancestors did, modeling in wax. After all the details have been added, the original is encased in a layer of fine clay. The result is a thin image in wax, sandwiched between two clay layers. When the clay dries, it is slowly heated, causing the wax to run out. Molten bronze will fill the space where the heated wax was. Such was the favorite technique of the European Renaissance, the lost wax process. It was practiced here centuries earlier. Colonialism long tried to subdue Nigeria's art. Its artists chafed against this censorship. The late painter Simon Okeke said, "I was born in a pagan society, surrounded by mysteries, supernatural influences. Then came Christianity and its teachings. The indigenous culture became a taboo, a mark of primitive living and a sure way to hell." In the 1920s and 30s, artist Aina Onobulu sought to mirror Western painting. Today, he's called the father of modern Nigerian art.
At the time Onobulu was working, most subscribed to the concept that it was not possible for the African artist to look at anything and conceptualize it accurately. He felt that he was fighting a battle. He was trying to, first of all, assert himself and the African position in the world of art.
Colonialism seemed pervasive and invincible. For years, Onobulu was Nigeria's only art teacher. Here, one of his students used Onobulu's Western-inspired techniques to paint the invisible, the unsanctioned, Nigeria's people and their daily lives. Overworked, Onobulu brought Kenneth Murray from Britain to become Nigeria's second art teacher. Murray encouraged his students to paint what they saw around them. Ben Nwanwu, Murray's best-known student, began his training with Murray in the late 1930s. This painting is from that period.
He inspired me to grow within my roots. In fact, Murray's philosophy of non-interference with native inspiration was what kept my art alive.
In 1960, the artist's struggle with colonialism ended with Nigeria's independence.
Independence brought in African personality. I mean, we felt it. We felt very proud. Now we're free. Now we can express ourselves the way we want to, and so on. And so it brought with it a kind of new wave of creativity.
The joy of independence prompted a fusion of the best of both worlds. This group of contemporary artists paved the way for successive generations. During the 1960s, in the village of Oshogbo, artists began to produce an art that was free, bright, unfettered by convention. The arts flourished during the early years of independence, reflecting the new nation's exuberance. But economic stress and politics would tear at the nation. This painting, May 31st, 1989, portrays one day of urban violence.
I know firsthand what it is to suffer. I've known hunger. I've also seen people suffering. My work and the works of a few other younger artists tend to address the disillusionment with the country and Africa in general. The failure of leadership, what somebody has termed reckless politics.
But reckless politics today threaten the planet's survival. Africa's Sahel region is being overcome by the spread of the Sahara. This ecological and human disaster called desertification is the subject of Bruce Onabrakpaye's art. In a series of prints called The Sahelian Masquerades, myths and reality come together in a prayer to halt the desert's spread. Printmaking is his choice, a direct medium he uses to carry an urgent and powerful message.
Now, this is, okay, will you turn now?
Can art move people both politically and aesthetically? Onabrakpaye attempts to answer this by uniting the diverse cultures of Nigeria into a tapestry of many threads. Here is the decorated gate to a cattle ranch. Onabrakpaye has blazoned it with a rich variety of myths, traditions, peoples. The cow stands for fertility, a means of shelter, movement, food. The art and Onabrakpaye's poem come together as prayer.
Your bones lay scorched and scattered on the land, which only yesterday was green. Someday, nature will be kinder. Rain will fall, plants will grow, and you will graze and roam again. The Saharian masquerade addresses itself to nature. Apart from that, it addresses itself to the human destruction in the region, dumping of waste that render the region useless, the destruction of wildlife and trees, oil spillage, the spoiling of the environment. This phenomenon is not only in Africa, but in all other parts of the world, something that concerns the entire world. The Sahelian masquerade is praying the people, praying nature, praying the gods to make it possible that this spread is arrested so that the region can become very habitable, very fruitful, very wealthy.
In the end, all the explorations of art appear to lead us back to our beginnings, to the sky and the earth, and man in between. For some Igbo people, this is the center of the universe. The decoration on the shrine at Nri in Igbo land includes motifs from an ancient artistic tradition known as uli. The uli palette is limited to earth colors and linear shapes. Combined, these conjure up a universe of uli legend and song.
Basically, nature is the source for the artist. The organization of nature, the structuring of cells, the structuring of plants, trees, the relationship between the earth, bodies of water, the sky, and so on. It's also the painting done by women on the walls, mud walls of shrines or private houses. The forms remain basically abstract. They are more or less like signs or summaries of the original models. So that basically is Uli. The line is very central to it, clean, lyrical line. Large open spaces are also part of this tradition as a counterpoint to areas of detailing and texture.
Well, the Uli tradition is essentially a female tradition. It's the females in Igbo society who were the people who developed this because they used the Uli forms to decorate themselves, to decorate the walls of homes, and during festival time they were asked to help with decorating public shrines and so on. Well, the tradition I had to learn from the right source, from my mother, but she happened to have learned it from her mother and to have practiced it a bit in her youth. She is artistic, I mean, in her own right. So I told her, well, why not do me a number of drawings? Talk to me more about this. So she did the early drawings in 1959 for me. That way she showed me the graphic form. And from those drawings, I started asking more questions.
Uche Okeke has been creating in the Uli tradition for over 30 years. He's written and taught widely on Uli history and symbolism. He still confers with his 94-year-old mother, who gave him the rudiments of Uli so long ago.
Nke a bụ ife ọkpọ ọkụkọ eji were emeju nke eti ebe o si wee pụta wee gbagote ọ ya dị mma.
It says she can't fill up the space more because that's the essence of Uli design. Use space sparingly.
Uche Okeke is the chief exponent of Uli in modern Nigerian art. He was the first to begin to experiment seriously with the forms of Uli, way back in the early 60s.
There is an Igbo folk poem that attests to the power of Uli. I traded without success. I then took to painting in Uli, and the gift of songs came unto me. Uli, delicate and refined, is one side of art in Nigeria, but there is also a robust side. Lenatui is a sculptor whose work reflects the violence of colonial history. His wood constructions are of rough, uneven planks that suggest the fractured and tortured geography of colonial Africa.
The way the chainsaw cut into the wood, reminded me of or took my mind back to the experience of the continent of Africa long ago when the colonialists arrived and started cutting almost everything. Something like cutting our culture into bits, slashing it into bits. That was what it brought to my mind. And I think since then, although I'm working a way of exploring the chainsaw, it has affected my sort of theme, the themes that I work with, nowadays. You'll find that most of my themes these days are concerned with the history of Africa. Yeah, with the incidence of colonialism very paramount in it. Well, the chainsaw is a very rough and raw material, and very limited in scope. When it cuts, there are a lot of woolly ends that it leaves, and you have to have a way of removing them. There's no other way except fire. And I find out that the fire gives the cuts a certain amount of unity because it gives them an overall black configuration, which lends unity.
In addition to the openness of Uli, Elenatwi also calls on Ghanaian textile designs. The complexity of his art draws on many traditions. Like those dense textile strips, some of Elenatwi's boards are filled with detail. Elenatwi himself explained his work in a recent poem.
I look at the textures of my work process, and I think about the texture and grain of Africa's history. I look at the authentic colors of the different types of wood, and they remind me of the real colors of Africa's history. I contemplate the directions of the large populations of mobile figures, and they replicate the migrations in Africa's history. I look at the variegated circumstances on the face of a large figure just created, and the feeling takes me across the face of Africa's history.
We have started to see the emergence of a new art, which is different but totally African in spirit and in content. The artists are now not only competent, but they are now free. They do not have to fight any of these battles against, there's no colonialism anymore. They're now operating, they're now benefiting from the victories, from the past victories of these giants of and pioneers of African contemporary art.
I have this belief that artists are trying to find a type of religion, a type of strength. They're going after an aim that isn't not part of this world.
And this is what I'm trying to achieve, to borrow something, but still when you look at it, at my work, you will know this is an African work.
I think art is a ritual, and if an artist is actually looking for his roots, then the rituals of his people are where he should go to.
I think when I use my father's images, and I use my experience, academic knowledge, and my political motivations, I'll be able to arrive at a point where realism and symbolism can meet. That to me is art.
Aka is the Igbo word for the hand. The hand is made up of different members. They are not of the same size. But they all come together to produce or to work or to make things. So we chose Aka as a symbol to represent the attempt by artists to come together to exhibit their works. Works by painters, sculptors, textile designers, ceramicists, and so on. So it's not a school, it's not a movement, but an informal coming together of kindred spirits.
Smithsonian World is made possible by Southwestern Bell, the company that's bringing your world closer together through communications. For home, for work, for today and tomorrow, Southwestern Bell Corporation. Smithsonian World is also made possible by the financial support of viewers like you, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Video cassettes of this program for educational use may be purchased by writing to PBS Video. Home video sales are not available through this offer.
This is PBS.
For a free reading list, please call or write the Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C., 20560.